Involvement with the criminal justice system is life-changing. It matters.
Having a justice system that works is a really important part of a democratic society.
I'm Penelope Gibbs, Director of Transform Justice.
I'm Rob Allen. I've worked in and around criminal justice all my career.
This is the Transform Justice podcast, throwing light on the criminal justice system.
Hearing from people who know.
It's about whether the system's fair
and what can be done to make it better.
Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss one of the most challenging questions. Should children convicted of the gravest crimes ever be given life sentences? Rob Allen and I are joined by Ryan Walker, who was convicted of murder at the age of 15 and sentenced to serve a minimum of 16 years in prison. Dr Susie Hulley has researched the experience of and policies underpinning child imprisonment for life. Rob, a life sentence is the most serious sentence a judge can give. What can a child, an under 18-year-old in England and Wales, be given a life sentence actually for?
Well, when a child, so anybody from the age of 10 upwards, is convicted of murder, then they are given a life sentence. It's mandatory, automatic. A judge has no choice about that. And there are a range of other very serious violent and sexual offences for which children can be given what's called a discretionary life sentence. They don't have to be given that, but they can. It's important to say that the life sentence doesn't mean that somebody is in prison for the rest of their life. What it does mean is that the judge sets a minimum term, 10, 12, 15, 20 years, whatever, and it's not until that point that they can be released. And it's only if at that point a parole board says, yes, it is safe to release, that they will return to the community. Even then, people subject to a life sentence are still under the life sentence, i.e. supervised, liable to be recalled to prison if they step out of line for any period up to the end of their life. That's why it's called a life sentence. The sentence does last for your whole life, just not all of it in prison.
Susie, we are outliers in Europe in our use of life sentences for children, aren't we?
Yes. There's very few European countries that do send children to prison for life. Cyprus and France also do, but when you look at the data, very, very few children are actually given those sentences. So in Cyprus, I think no children have been given it recently, and in France, it's something like 2 children in the last 25 years.
How does that compare to here?
Well, in England and Wales in September 2022, there were 446 people in prison who were serving a sentence of life that they received as a child.
So we're talking chalk and cheese between Europe and us.
Yes.
And there's also the difference of they start at a different point, don't they, imprisoning?
Yes, they have higher minimum ages for children who are responsible for their criminal offences.
Because obviously one of the key cases which comes to mind when we're talking about children and murder is the Bulger boys, who were very, very young.
Yeah.
How old were they, Rob?
10 and 11, I think.
Yeah, which wouldn't happen then in most European countries and wouldn't happen now. They would get life sentences, which they did.
So, Ryan, you pleaded guilty in court, but was it still a shock to hear a judge tell you that you got a life sentence?
Yeah, definitely, because my legal team said to me, you will not get more than 10 years. So when they said 16 years, it was like, woof. And I went downstairs and I remember saying to my QC, what happened? Just crying there, like, you told me I wouldn't spend longer than 10.
So that was the minimum period that you would have to serve. But were you aware that you were going to get a life sentence and it was just a question of how long you would spend in custody that was at issue?
No, I didn't really understand it all, because they're telling you this type of stuff like you've received a life sentence, and it's like, well, what does that mean? And they're saying you'll be sentenced for the rest of your life and we'll only let you out when we feel it's appropriate. So you don't really understand the true effects of it all until you get to prison. And even in prison, no one really explains it or educates you about it. So it kind of takes you 3 or 4 years to really understand the process.
So what age do you think you did really have a good understanding of what you were on and what it meant for you?
I was probably around 21 when I got a piece of paper under my door saying, your sentence is being reviewed. A tick box, would you like to have a HMP review? So I just ticked it and sent it off.
You applied to get that 16 years reduced.
Yeah, and what they do is take into consideration maturity and welfare and exceptional progress. So when I received this piece of paper saying, like, you've got a chance to have your sentence reduced and you can be out sooner, obviously I ticked yes. And I thought I had a realistic chance because I was exceptional in my own brain. But when I got the feedback back, it was just like, you're just doing what every other prisoner's doing who's well behaved. You're not doing nothing above and beyond.
Going back to that prison experience, did that long sentence affect your behaviour and mental health?
Oh, definitely. I had no hope. And like people around me were all getting out, so I'd get a new friendship with a couple of people who'd come in, and then all of a sudden they leave. So like you've never got one stable friendship group, and then people come in and out, so like they always cause trouble with you because they know they're going home. And young kids who receive life sentences are often targets because other inmates know that they can't mess up. Like they'll get in trouble more than someone who's just coming in and going out. So
they try and trigger you?
Yeah, they trigger you and they know that you can't retaliate and stuff like that. Everyone says you won't get your parole, you'll never get out. And that leaves you feeling hopeless. So when you do have confrontation and stuff like that, you think, oh, well, I'm not getting out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. You've got nothing to lose as such. And there's a big rumour around the juveniles, like the more you mess around when you're a kid, the better your chances are at getting out because you're showing progression. So that circulates among staff. The more experienced staff will tell young kids that. So there's almost like an expectation for you to misbehave within the juveniles prisons.
Really?
That
So
sounds
what's
crazy.
Staff telling you that if you misbehave and then get better, that'll look good for you, and in the long run, it'll do you good.
Yeah, there's loads of myths like that. I only really understood how many myths there was until I went to the adult prison and started speaking to genuine lifers. But there's just constant fear within the juveniles about how you're going to be treated when you transfer to adult prison.
Yeah. I mean, Susie, you've done research interviewing, and people like Ryan who've been imprisoned as children. Do they tell you about the shock of getting this sentence and in the first period trying to process it and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. People are shocked when they get a life sentence. Again, we heard people talk about lawyers promising shorter sentences and that had a really profound impact on someone, but also just the experience of being told that you're being convicted of murder and you're getting a life sentence. Both of those things feel like a really huge thing for a child. And people would talk about what we call temporal vertigo, so like a sort of dizziness and disorientation from the number of years that they're told they have to spend in prison.
What a physical symptom.
Yeah, and people talked about their legs buckling in the dock, often trying to appear like they're fine for their own family. That's one of the things that you hear in the media quite a lot. They showed no expression when they got their sentence, but we know that that's because people are trying to appear like they'll be okay for their mums and their families. But yeah, an acutely emotional stage the first few years, and we talk about it in the work that we've done as a form of defending against these emotions. A lot of what people do in those first few years is trying to just not have to deal with those really overwhelming emotions that they feel, and so they do end up getting involved in violence, taking drugs, sleeping an awful lot, trying to sleep away the years. We also heard the myths about if you act up in the first few years, it's better for you. But there is also a reaction to just having to live day to day because you can't possibly imagine the number of years that you've got in prison, which is often longer than people have been alive, or at least longer than they sort of remember being alive.
Yeah. Quite a lot of children sentenced to life have been convicted for what's called joint enterprise. So they've been convicted for involvement in a murder rather than actually doing the deed, if you like. Did people like that find it particularly difficult to come to terms with their sentence?
Yes, there can be different ways that you can be convicted, but one of the ways when we were doing the research was that you could have just foreseen that the offence might happen, and that is quite a low bar, so people would be really confused why they were getting convicted.
So they might be in a gang or a group of young people, somebody is killed, and they can be swept up and convicted if they were thought to have have foreseen what was going to happen.
Yeah, that's no longer the case. You now have to have intended to assist and encourage, but it's a very wide understanding of what that means. So there could be a child who is 100 metres away when an altercation happens. Their friend, for example, stabs someone and they might not be at the scene. And a lot of children struggle to understand how they can be called a murderer if they've never killed anyone. And that's a really difficult thing to process. And a lot of what people do is find their sentence and their conviction really illegitimate because they feel like they should be labelled something different and they shouldn't be getting a mandatory life sentence.
Ryan, you must have met other children who had been convicted of murder, but on a joint enterprise basis. Did you find that they found it particularly hard to cope with their sentence?
Yeah, they find it more difficult because understandably they're not guilty of the offence. So you can just see the lack of trust in the state, and that transforms into other aspects of the prison regime. Like they'll be really closed off with other prisoners because they've just been so deeply harmed by the system. Like, who can I trust? I weren't even there that night, and I'm spending 18 years of my life in prison, and I can't do no offender behaviour courses because I don't want to admit to something I didn't do. So the system sees them as someone who's claiming innocence and they're not willing to do work. So they're just constantly up against it. And there's another myth, what's gotten a little bit better recently, but they're never going to get out because they're maintaining innocence. So a lot of my friends used to just say, well, I'm just going to say I done it just to make my sentence easier. And you can see that it has a emotional burden on them, telling people that they're a murderer when they've not actually took part in the murder, just to make their life easier and that they can get home to the family sooner.
So ironically, in a kind of way, you were in a better position than them because you did accept responsibility for the crime you were accused of, and therefore you didn't have that kind of huge conflict.
Yeah, it probably took me about 3 years to stop having dreams that they just open the door and say, come on now, we're joking. We just wanted to give you a bit of a warning sign. Like, you don't come to terms with actually what's happened until you start maturing. And that didn't happen for a good 3 or 4 years.
And what clicked then? Was there one moment, or was it just a gradual thing?
It was a gradual thing through maturity and just getting older, but I remember the clear moment when I went to Oak Course from Morelands. So there was a riot in Morelands prison in the YOIs, and all of a sudden we all got shipped out to the adult prison, and almost instantly my behaviour changed because you can't get away with the behaviour you do in the juveniles and YOIs in the adult prison. There's a lot of older guys there who are mature. They want the wing to run stable. So they don't want no kids coming on there smashing the TVs up because they get locked down. They can't speak to the kids on the phone and stuff like that. So it's the atmosphere is a little bit different. So you've gone from like juveniles and YOIs where everything's rowdy, everyone's smashing the cells and, you know, it's violent, to all of a sudden really calm, and then you can put your guard down and, you know, your true character can come out, and then you start taking opportunities within the prison.
I mean, either in the YOIs or in the adult prison, did you get much sort of specialist help to sort of help you come to terms with what you'd done?
Not really. There's no specialist care. You're just lumped in with everyone else and you're expected to behave like everyone else, and, you know, they come down on you a little bit more harder if you don't. So there's no actually tailored support. There's therapy and stuff like that, but it's not specifically designed for kids.
I think one of the complications is that a lot of what happens in prison is run by psychology, and there are sort of cognitive behavioural programs which offer a certain type of intervention, but that isn't often what people need at that point when they're coming to terms with a murder in particular. There are a lot of really complex moral emotions about that, and what people really need is really intense psychotherapeutic support, and that's what you don't often see. And what's also complicated is that psychologists in prisons are doing a particular job, and often that is about kind of risk assessing. So it means that people who are serving a life sentence, who are kind of just trying to make sense of sometimes what they've done if they have been involved in fatal violence, but also just coming to terms with what it's like to be in prison, there's a lot that they don't feel they can say, because if they say it to a psychologist, it can be taken as a kind of risk factor. So there's all these issues where the people who might be able to offer the most support, it's not necessary that prisoners trust them with their kind of most honest feelings. Some of what I've written about is people slowly trying to come to terms with what they've done and why they did it. And that takes quite a lot of kind of talking around the issue and potentially saying things that psychologists would identify as excuses or justifications, but it's actually just people trying to kind of make sense of what they've done in order to move beyond it.
So who could people talk to if not a psychologist in prison? A prison officer? Or...
I mean, actually, I think often it's people like the chaplains or other prisoners, especially if you're serving a life sentence and you're in a prison with other long-term prisoners, or you see the same person over the time that you're in prison. People often make those kind of close relationships with others that they trust.
You're nodding, Ryan. Is that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, definitely. You do rely on the older prisoners who've got a lot of experience. And, you know, I found myself with a good few mentors inside, and I'd rely on them more than psychology. On the odd chance, you'd get a really good offender manager, and they'd really understand.
Who are they, a prison officer?
No, so the offender manager, so they manage all your risk while you're in custody. So on the odd chance, you do find a really good offender manager, and they really understand you, like I did, for example. Like I spent 5 years not working with no one because it was always busy, or you'd put an application in, they'd never come and see you. And then all of a sudden I found this lady who really understood the life sentence for children, because that's another thing. Staff don't really understand the HMP sentence because it's got different speculations to a life sentence for adults. But you do meet a good couple of offender managers who really understand your risk, and like Susie's saying, you can be open and honest with them rather than psychology, because you know when it comes to psychology coming for you, everything's scrutinised. So if you say, I'm feeling a bit stressed, I'm feeling a bit like I want to lash out in these situations, they're seeing it as a risk straight away, whereas an offender manager will like notice patterns and try and work through it and stuff like that. So,
Susie, do you think Ryan's trajectory, if that's the right word, of you know, a difficult first few years, then sort of settling down perhaps when he moved to the adult prison, is that a pattern that you've seen in your studies?
Yeah, it's definitely a pattern. First 5 years is often incredibly tumultuous, and then people start to kind of find meaning, find purpose, find things that they enjoy doing. But then what was interesting is we went back and re-interviewed everyone 8 years later. And actually, that isn't always how it is for people.
Some people don't settle down.
Well, not just that, but the trajectory isn't just kind of linear. People might settle down for a moment, but then there can be things that inevitably throw them off that pathway. So we're looking at things like a parent dying or a grandparent dying could really affect people's mental health, and they could have been on quite a positive trajectory, and that could have a really significant impact. Or they could move prisons, and that could be really not something that they wanted. So that although there is this kind of general trajectory, there are all sorts of ways that that might not happen for people. And with incredibly long sentences, which is what we're seeing more and more of, you're not even at the halfway stage after 10 years. You know, that is incredibly hard to maintain hope if you think you're not getting out for 20 years.
So, Ryan, leaving prison, however longed for, must have been difficult. What were the biggest challenges?
I think leading up to my release, I was really, really struggling inside. Like, I was so anxious, and...
What, that it might not happen?
No, quite the opposite. I didn't really want to come out, if I'm totally honest. I had my sentence reduced, and the excitement after that was like, yes, I've got a year off or 18 months off. And when I got my parole date, I was like, yes, I'm really excited, and I prepared all for my parole. But as soon as he said you've been given open conditions, that's when it just hit me, and it was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So then I started having like anxious thoughts and stuff like that for the next couple of months. And then it was time to move to open. And then, yeah, I was just in a negative mind space, and I was asking people for help, but because I carried myself so well in the prison and everyone knew me and I'd done really well, no one really like give me that support, because it's, oh, you'll be fine.
So they didn't take it seriously because you didn't look as if you were anxious?
Yeah, I didn't look vulnerable. So when I was asking people for help, it's like, you'll be fine, mate. And then, yeah, when I come out, it was just like getting used to the world again, how fast paced it was. Like, I remember first walking onto the street and I thought this bus was going to hit me. It just sounded like a jumbo jet. Like everything was 100 miles an hour.
Did the open prison experience prepare you for release? Were you able to go out from the open prison a little bit?
Yeah, so that was like my saviour, because I'd done it gradually rather than just being released. I think I wouldn't have been able to cope if they just said, right, off you pop. I think it would have been too overwhelming, so I went to open. I had a town visit straight away with an officer, and that was like dipping your toes in the water. I knew an officer was there, you know, as protection, and that visit went well. And then I had a town visit on my own, and then I started working, then I started doing my driver's license, and over a year it just got easier and easier to deal with the outside world.
Ryan, can I ask, has there been times since that it's got harder again?
I've been finding it easier as time goes on, but then all of a sudden I'll just get this, who am I in the world moment? What are my skills? What am I contributing? You know, I think because of spending so long in there, you're just seen as like a number. And then all of a sudden you come out and you want to do well. And then, yeah, I think the novelty wears off of actually being out and in the community. And then all of a sudden you start asking yourself, well, what have I done? You know?
Mm. I mean, one of the things that lifers have, in a sense, is the shadow of the sentence over them the whole time, the possibility of, if you step out of line, you may end up going back to prison. Do you have feelings about that? How does that affect you?
It definitely changes you. It's like someone's constantly watching over you. I remember when I first come out, I felt like I had a big label over my head saying I'm on probation. The psychological pressure of just, you know, you grab your mobile and you hide it in your pocket because you hear a siren and you think, is it for me? I reckon for about 2.5 years, every time I went to probation, I thought, am I going to come out today? You've not done nothing, but you just don't know whether you're going to get recalled.
Mm. And do you still have to go to probation?
Yeah, I still go to probation. Every 2 months now, it's been 5 years. And I have a phone call in the interim.
I think that's the thing about life licence for children, is it's disproportionately long because they are inevitably under life licence for such a huge amount of their lives.
Mm. And is there a facility to end the life licence?
Yeah, after 10 years, I think it is, you can apply. But it doesn't mean that you're no longer on licence. It means you no longer have to meet your probation officer on a regular basis, where you can still be recalled to prison. And when you're recalled, it's not completely clear how long you'll be in for. So you could be recalled to prison for missing an appointment or something quite minor, but you might end up being in prison for months or years because of the way the bureaucracy and the administration of that is done.
So, Susie, Ryan was originally sentenced to serve a minimum of 16 years, though that was reduced at a certain point. Has legislation and practice since then affected how long children receiving life are now getting as their minimum tariff?
Yeah, we know that more children are getting life sentences and the average minimum terms that they're being given by a court is increasing. And part of that is because judges are using the kind of adult sentences as a way of
sort of benchmarking.
Exactly, as benchmarking, because before 2022, the minimum starting point that a judge had to start their life sentence at for a child was 12 years. But they were already pulling it up because for an adult who's 18, for example, if they take a knife to the scene, the minimum starting point is 25 years.
When you say start, they start their consideration of what the sentence should be.
Yeah, they have to start there, and then they can lift it up or down depending on aggravating and mitigating factors. But what happened in 2022 was that there was legislation that actually changed life sentences for children. So we now have a grid based on the age of the child and the type of murder that they've been convicted of, and it aligns with those adult sentences. So now, if you're a child who's, say, 16 and you commit an offence where a knife is taken to the scene, the sentence is much higher than 12. I think it's something like 17. And if you're a 17-year-old who commits murder with a gun, which is the sort of most serious, longest sentence for an adult, it's now 27 years. Prior to the change in the law, the judge would be starting at 12 years. They absolutely would have been pulling it up because it's a gun, because it's very serious. But now the judge has to start at 27 years. So you can see the way that that will pull the kind of average sentences, and sentences, particularly at the top end, will massively increase.
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, nowadays you visit child lifers in prison to offer them support and I guess the benefit of your experience. Do you think in some ways they're worse off than you were?
Oh, definitely. In every way possible. The sentence inflation has just gone through the roof. We seen it when we was in there, and you just seen people getting like 23, 25, and it was going up. And now the juvenile prisons are just so different to what it was when I was back there. Like, these kids are locked up most of the day. They're on keeper parts, so they're not allowed association.
So they've got to be kept apart from other people because they might be violent or whatever.
Yeah, they're not allowed to mix. Like, when I was a juvenile, there was like, I want to say 10 prisons for juveniles, so you was likely to be closer to your family. Now there's only like 3 or 4, so like everyone's kind of lumped in Warrington, Feltham or Wetherby. And if you have trouble in Feltham and you're from London, for example, you're going up to Wetherby.
Miles from your family, probably.
I'm in Yorkshire,
Yeah, and you're not going to get to see your family. And that's the most important thing, is family while you're in.
Just picking up on that quickly, the biggest pain of imprisonment for children serving life sentences is missing loved ones. You know, that's the punishment, is, you know, not being able to be close to your loved ones for 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
Do these remote visits, you know, the kind of, I think they call it purple visits, the Zoom visits, does that mitigate that a bit? Or
I mean, people said that the remote visits offered you an insight into people's lives in a way that you wouldn't have seen before. So your little brother could show you their bedroom, or, you know, those were kind of something that they liked, but they're not a replacement for physical touch.
We visited Oak Hill the other day, which I know has had some bad reports, but they seem to have a system there that you could have almost as many of these video calls in your free time in the evening as you wanted. And there was a boy there who had video calls practically every evening with different members of his family. So prison is prison, but that did seem an improvement.
I think it's family visits that people want the most. They want those visits that are 2 or 3 hours long, where family members can come. They can maybe make them some food. They can hang out. It's about the quality rather than the quantity, you know, just being able to have those moments like you have with your family where somebody says something funny and you share that experience that, you know, is unlikely to happen on a video call, but also on incredibly stressful half an hour, 1 hour experiences. And if you've got children there, that's even harder.
And it's also about just having that physical touch, because prison's very closed off, very emotionless. Like, you can't say the wrong thing to an officer in case you seem to be flirting or anything. So, like, you have to really toe a line. And then when your family come up, it's your time to just relax and, you know, come here, you give me a big cuddle to your nephew or your niece or your mum. It just gives you that sense of normality for 2 hours. And then you get back and it's back to normal, but you need it. That's the only thing the purple visits are not good for.
I mean, Susie, there's a campaign by the charity Jengba to abolish life sentences for children altogether, I think. Do you support that?
Yes, I absolutely support the abolition of life sentences for children. I think that we know the pain and distress they cause, and I think the disproportionate impact of life licence means that there are other ways that we could be responding to children who commit serious harm. It's also worth noting that these are often children who have experienced serious harm themselves, but determinate sentences offer a way of...
The determinate sentence being a fixed one.
10 years, 15 years.
Exactly, which provides children with hope and understanding about what will be happening to them. There's also a period on licence, so those children will be monitored when they're released. But it means that you're not sentencing a child to be under the observation of the state for the rest of their lives.
But given Parliament has only just toughened life sentences for children. Do you see any prospect of success in abolishing life sentences for children?
I think it would be incredibly difficult. What we're seeing is increases rather than any suggestion that there'll be reductions or abolition of life sentences.
Ryan, this is a difficult one. It is victims who campaign for tougher sentences. So Carol Gould, whose daughter Ellie was killed by her 17-year-old boyfriend, was the one who campaigned for higher life sentences for children. Do you think it's possible to persuade victims that children should get fixed-term sentences rather than life sentences?
Yeah, it's very difficult to even try to imagine what they go through and then to say to them, oh, well, he's not going to have a life sentence. But I think what you hear from victims who have done restorative justice is that they want people to be better people within society. And I think a whole life sentence, even if it's just a license for the rest of your life, I don't think that achieves allowing the young person to come out and be a better person. You need an element of reward for the person who's changed their life around, and you need that to act as a motivator for other people who might come out and give up hope and start committing crime again. So I think if the goal is to bring a person to come out and be the best version of themselves and add the most to society, sometimes you need to just let go of this person and say he's ready, he's done everything he can, we know he's going to go out and do great things for the community.
Yeah, Susie, what do you think about this point?
I mean, I think victims matter enormously, and they obviously deserve care, compassion, justice. But what's interesting is that there's very little research that tells us what justice means to the families of homicide victims. What we know from victims of sexual violence is that what justice means changes over time, and it can be very layered. And like Ryan said, it's not always just punishment and retribution. It's also not wanting somebody to hurt other people, wanting to see people do good things with their lives. So I think it's possible to talk about wanting victims to have a system that is caring and compassionate and provides them with justice, whatever that means for an individual or a family, whilst also thinking about the development and the responsibility of a child and what we want from our system and what we want the system to do for that child that will bring them out into the community and ensure that they are safe, young adults who are positively contributing to society, having their well-being being as good as it can in order for them to do something positive with their lives that they'll have left, because we know that as they go in so young, they'll also come out quite young. They might be 30 when they come out with a whole life ahead of them. And it depends what we want from the system, what we want it to do for those children who come out and who we want them to be in the community when they do come out.
Fascinating. Well, thanks for that. We need to draw the discussion to a close. We end these podcasts by asking each of our guests, if you were in charge of the system, Lord Chancellor, Minister of Justice, in this case, accepting that abolishing life sentences for children is going to be very challenging, what one thing would you do to improve the current law on child life sentences? Ryan?
Possibly more care taken around minimum term reviews. So like a few years back, you could have a review every 2 years. So they're constantly checking your welfare from a high court judge. And then they reduced it to just you get one chance now. And the kids aren't ready for that one chance. So maybe they need constantly over the years to be reviewed by specialists to make sure that they're developing properly. The prison system, the juvenile system needs to be equipped well better to deal with child lifers. There needs to be some education around that and some psychological intervention.
What about you, Susie?
I would reverse the changes to the law that increase the life sentences for children. I think the 12-year starting point was as much as we should be thinking about for children.
Okay, thanks. Penelope, what about you?
I would like to get to the point where even if you have a child life licence on a criminal record check, that sentence does not come up. So you could have that life sentence for probation for the police, but it wouldn't come up to employers after a certain number of years to give you a better chance of getting work and promotion and so on. Rob?
Well, what I've learned from this is that the kind of distinction that there used to be between children and adults who commit very serious crimes, including murder, has been eroded substantially over the last few years, this 27-year starting point for a 17-year-old. And I think definitely that distinction needs to be reinstated as a matter of urgency.
Great. Thanks, Rob, Susie and Ryan. And references to the Jengba campaign and to other information on child life sentences will be in our programme notes. Till next time, goodbye.
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 Goodbye.